She was ordered to give the Duke a daughter, and she gave him a son. That is the whole story, in a way. The prophet who toppled an empire, the holy war that killed more than 60 billion people across the galaxy, the god emperor who ruled as a half sandworm for 3,500 years. All of it traces back to one woman on the ocean world of Caladan, who decided she loved a man more than she feared the order that built her. Her name was Jessica. The order was the Bene Gesserit. They had spent 90 generations arranging marriages and steering bloodlines toward a single goal, the birth of one perfect human being. Jessica was meant to be one obedient step in that plan. Instead, she broke it quietly, out of love, and the entire future of the human race bent around the break. It is easy to read the Dune novels and follow Jessica under supporting cast. She is Paul's mother. She is the Duke's woman. She stands behind the prophet. But look closely, and the arrangement reverses. Paul reacts to a situation Jessica created. The Emperor, the Harkonnens, the Fremen, the Sisterhood. Every faction in the first novel is responding to a board that one concubine rearranged before the story even begins. Frank Herbert built his saga on the idea that a single small human choice, made for ordinary human reasons, can outweigh 90 generations of design. Jessica is where he plants that idea. So it is worth slowing down to ask who she actually was, where she came from, what she was made to do, and what it cost her to do the one thing she was made never to do. To feel the weight of what happens to her, you need the shape of the world she lives in. The story unfolds in a feudal interstellar empire tens of thousands of years in the future, ruled by an emperor of House Corrino, who holds power in a careful balance against the Landsraad, the assembly of the great houses, the noble families who govern individual planets. Underneath the politics sits a vast commercial combine called Choam, through which the wealth of the empire is divided, and a house's standing is measured partly in its shares of it. House Atreides, Leto's family, is one of these great houses, respected and rising. House Harkonnen is another, rich and hated. The emperor sits above them all, but rules by managing their rivalries. And the moment any single house grows too admired, too capable, too loved by the others, it becomes a threat to him. That is the machine Jessica lives inside. And it is the reason her family is about to be destroyed, because House Atreides has become exactly that kind of threat. The empire turns on a single substance, and the substance comes from one planet. The spice melange exists nowhere but Arrakis, the desert world the Fremen call Dune, and it is the most valuable thing in the universe. Melange extends human life and sharpens the mind, but its real importance is travel. The Spacing Guild holds a monopoly on movement between worlds, and its navigators take enormous doses of spice to gain a narrow prescience, seeing a safe path through space so their ships can fold across vast distances without being torn apart. No spice, no interstellar travel, no travel, and the empire of thousands of worlds falls apart. So whoever controls Arrakis holds a knife at the throat of all civilization. When the Emperor orders House Atreides to take Arrakis from their enemies, the Harkonnens, it looks like a great promotion. It is a trap dressed as a gift, because placing the Atreides on the one planet that matters makes them easy to isolate and destroy. Jessica grasps the size of the prize and the danger beneath it from the first. To understand what she broke, you have to understand what she was. The Bene Gesserit get called witches throughout the novels, and the Order encourages the label, because fear is a tool and a frightened population is a manageable one. What they actually are is a sisterhood of women who have trained the human body and mind so far past the normal limit that the results look supernatural and are really just discipline taken to an extreme. They call the foundation of it prana bindu, which means nerve and muscle. A fully trained sister can control her own physiology the way most people control a hand. She can slow her heartbeat. She can alter the chemistry of her blood. She can isolate a poison in one part of her body and break it down before it kills her. This is not magic in Herbert's world. It is the claim that a human being, given enough generations of method and enough years of practice, can run the machinery of the body by conscious will. On top of that physical base, the Order trains perception and influence. A sister is a truth-sayer, able to read the truth or falsehood of a statement from the tiny involuntary signals a speaker gives off, the shift in breath, the catch in a muscle, the change of pulse at the throat. Lying to a trained Bene Gesserit is nearly impossible. And a sister commands voice, a way of pitching and shading her tone so precisely that it slips past a listener's judgment and strikes at the nervous system directly, compelling obedience for a crucial second or two. Jessica had all of this at a high level. In the first novel, she uses voice to free herself at the moment it matters most. She reads the people around her like open documents. She was, by the Order's own measure, a gifted student of a brutally demanding school. And the school had taken her as an infant and raised her without parents, without a family name, with nothing to be loyal to except the sisterhood itself. It is worth dwelling on the litany against fear because it tells you what the Order values. The recitation runs, "I must not fear. Fear is the mind killer. Fear is the little death that brings total obliteration. I will face my fear. I will permit it to pass over me and through me. And when it has gone past, only I will remain." Read it closely, and you see the whole philosophy of the Bene Gesserit folded into a few lines. Fear is not denied or crushed. It is observed, allowed to move through the body, and outlasted so that the conscious self is never knocked off the controls. The Order builds women who do not flinch, who can stand at the edge of death and keep thinking clearly. What the Order does not build on purpose is women who let love sit in that same controlling seat. Fear, they teach you to master. Love, they teach you to distrust, because love makes an agent unpredictable, and an unpredictable agent is a flaw in the design. Jessica mastered the fear exactly as she was taught. The love she could not master and would not. And that is the whole difference between her and the Order that raised her. The training happens on a planet called Wallach 9. And at bottom, it is the careful removal of everything in a person that might one day act against the Order. A sister learns to put a gap between feeling and action, so emotion never moves her hand without permission. She learns to reach other memory, the stored lives of the women who came before her, an inheritance of consciousness passed down the female line. And above all, she learns a kind of obedience built so deep it never feels like obedience from the inside. It feels like her own good sense. That last piece is the Order's masterwork. They do not want agents who chafe and resent and might defect. They want agents for whom defection is simply unthinkable, which is exactly what makes Jessica extraordinary. She was engineered with great care to be incapable of the choice she would one day make. Now, the strange part, and the part where I have to be careful about where the information comes from, in Frank Herbert's original 6 novels, Jessica's parentage is a deliberate blank. She knows she is the natural daughter of some unknown Bene Gesserit, a child of the breeding program handed to the schools, and she carries that not knowing as a private wound. The full answer arrives from outside the original books. It comes first from the prequel novels written decades later by Frank's son, Brian Herbert, with Kevin J. Anderson, who have said the secret was waiting in Frank Herbert's own notes. And it comes independently from a screenplay Frank Herbert wrote in the early 1980s for a film that was never made, a document rediscovered in 2023, which names the same answer. So the parentage is about as canonical as a thing can be without appearing in the original prose. The detailed dramatization, though, belongs to the prequels, and a careful reader holds those two facts apart. The answer is this. Jessica's mother was the Reverend Mother Gaius Helen Mohiam, one of the most powerful figures in the entire Order, the Emperor's own truthsayer. And her father was Baron Vladimir Harkonnen. You have to sit with that, because it rearranges the whole saga. The Harkonnens are the cruelty at the center of Dune, a house defined by appetite and brutality. And the Baron is its grotesque heart, a man who has people killed for sport and runs his fief by terror. Paul Atreides, Jessica's son, is the figure who rises to annihilate House Harkonnen and avenge his father. And Paul is, through his mother, a Harkonnen. The blood of the villain runs in the hero, and the hero's mother carried that blood her whole life without knowing it. There is a bitter symmetry underneath. The breeding program had for generations been trying to cross the Atreides line with the Harkonnen line because the Order calculated that the union of those two specific bloodlines would yield their perfect human. Jessica was already half of that equation, the hidden Harkonnen daughter, deliberately placed inside House Atreides. She thought she was an outsider, serving a noble house. She was the missing half of the cross, walked into position. She was simply never told what she was. And there is a colder detail still if you take the prequels at their word. Near the start of Dune, an aged Reverend Mother comes to Caladan to test the boy Paul. She holds a poisoned needle at his neck, a thing called the Gom Jabbar, and orders him to keep his hand inside a box while it floods him with the sensation of his own flesh burning to learn whether he can master animal instinct with human will. If he pulls his hand out, the needle kills him. That old woman is Gaius Helen Mohiam, which means the woman holding death at the boy's throat, deciding whether he is worth keeping alive, is his own grandmother testing her grandson. And the mother on the other side of the door, listening to her child scream and forbidden by the Order to interfere, is Mohiam's own daughter, obeying her mother one more time. The original novel never says any of this. The scene works without it. But once the parentage is in your head, that quiet domestic horror sits underneath every line of it. They place her with Duke Leto Atreides as a bound concubine, and the word concubine is doing real work. Leto never married Jessica, and that was not coldness, it was statecraft. A ruling duke keeps his hand in marriage unplayed, a treaty he can offer to another great house when the politics demand it. So Leto stayed formally unwed and kept Jessica beside him for more than 20 years. And over those years, the political arrangement quietly became the central relationship of both their lives. They fell in love, genuinely, the way the Order specifically trains its sisters not to, because love in an agent is a variable the Order cannot control. Jessica had been sent to harvest Leto's bloodline and report on his house. She was meant to be a Bene Gesserit first, and Leto's partner a distant second. The Order misjudged her. She became his partner first and a sister second, and that single inversion of priorities is the hidden engine under everything that follows. The Order's goal needs explaining, because it is the secret reason Jessica exists at all. A Reverend Mother in her spice trance can reach into other memory and touch the lives of all her female ancestors, an unbroken chain of women's consciousness running back into the deep past. But there's a place in that inner landscape a sister cannot go, a male region of ancestral memory that no woman has ever been able to look into and survive. The Kwisatz Haderach, a phrase the Order borrowed, meaning roughly the shortening of the way, was their name for a male who could enter that forbidden place, hold both the male and female inheritance at once, and see across time in a way no Reverend Mother ever could. Such a being would be the most powerful human ever born, able to perceive paths through the future, the way a guild navigator perceives paths through space. The sisterhood wanted to create him so they could control him, a perfect human on a leash. 90 generations of arranged marriages aimed at his birth. Paul becomes that being, arrived a generation early, in a body loyal to his parents, with no leash at all. And that, more than any single battle, is why the Order comes to fear what Jessica did. Then came the instruction. The sisterhood directed Jessica to bear Leto a daughter, specifically a daughter. And here, the biology of the Order matters, because a trained sister can choose the sex of her child. Her control over her own body runs deep enough to select, at the moment of conception, which possibility takes hold. The choice was hers to make in her own flesh, and the plan riding on that choice was precise. The daughter was to be wed to the Harkonnen heir, a young man named Feyd Rautha, a marriage that would close the long blood feud between the two houses and gather the scattered threads of the breeding program into one place. The child of that marriage, the next generation down, was meant to be the culmination of the entire project. They had the name ready for him, the Kwisatz Haderach. Jessica's daughter was to be the second to last step before he arrived. Jessica gave Leto a son. She did it, by her own account, out of love, and the reason is almost embarrassingly human. Leto wanted a boy. He wanted an heir to carry the Atreides name, and Jessica wanted to give the man she loved the thing he longed for. That is the entire motive. Not prophecy, not ambition, not some secret plan of her own to outflank the sisterhood. A woman wanted to make the man she loved happy, so she gave him a son. And in that one tender, ordinary decision, she dragged the Kwisatz Haderach forward by a full generation into a male body the Order had not arranged and could not steer, raised in loyalty to his parents rather than to the school. Paul was the perfect human, arriving early and off-plan. The sisterhood had spent 90 generations grinding a key to fit a single lock. Jessica, out of love, finished it one turn too early, and it opened a door none of them, including her, were ready to walk through. There is a further transgression folded into how she raised her son, one a careful reader of the Order's rules notices at once. Jessica did not only bear a male child off plan, she trained him. From early childhood, she taught Paul the Bene Gesserit disciplines, the prana bindu control, the reading of people, the beginnings of voice, methods the Order guards jealously and reserves for its sisters. Teaching those techniques to a male, outside the Order's sanction, was itself a serious breach. By the time Paul faces his first real tests, he already moves like a partly trained sister, because his mother gave him an education she had no permission to give. So his terrifying capability is not only bloodline and prophecy. A large part of it is simply that his mother loved him enough to hand him every weapon she had, rules be damned. The Order built the genetic potential over 90 generations. Jessica, in one childhood, armed it. When House Atreides takes over Arrakis, Jessica goes as the Duke's lady in all but title, and she walks into a trap that everyone but the Atreides can see. She feels the wrongness of it before anyone can prove it. There is a quiet, painful thread in the first novel where the Atreides master of assassins, Thufir Hawat, suspects that Jessica herself is the traitor in their midst, because the cold logic of betrayal points straight at the Bene Gesserit outsider. She knows he suspects her. She cannot fully clear herself without exposing things she will not expose. And she carries that suspicion with the discipline of her training, doing her duty to the house while the house's own spy master watches her for a treason that is in fact being committed by the doctor everyone trusts. A small scene early on shows exactly how her training turns a deadly moment to advantage. The Atreides housekeeper on Arrakis, a Fremen woman called the Shadout Mapes, tests Jessica by presenting her with a crysknife, a sacred blade ground from the tooth of a sandworm, a weapon so holy to the Fremen that by their custom, once it is unsheathed, it cannot be put away until it has drawn blood. Mapes is watching to see whether the off-world lady is the one from the seeded prophecy. Jessica, reading the woman's tension and drawing on fragments of the implanted legends she was taught, says exactly the right things, survives the test, and turns a potential assassin into a believer. It is a clean demonstration of the whole Bene Gesserit method. Read the body, recall the relevant doctrine, choose the precise words, steer a lethal encounter to safety. She does this kind of thing constantly, and it is why she lives long enough to reach the desert at all. The blow falls at night. The Atreides physician, Dr. Wellington Yue, has been broken by the Harkonnens, who hold his captured wife and dangle her life in front of him, and he betrays the house from the inside, lowering its defenses and letting the attack in. Duke Leto is taken alive. He dies, attempting to assassinate the Baron with a poisoned false tooth Yue planted in his jaw, a last act of defiance that kills several Harkonnen men but misses the Baron himself. In the space of one night, Jessica falls from consort of a great house to a fugitive in the most hostile environment in the known universe. A desert that kills the unprepared within hours, with a young son to protect and a second child already growing inside her. And this is the turning of her whole life. The training the Order drilled into her to make her their instrument stops serving them and starts serving her. It is easy to lose Leto in the machinery of the plot. But the bond the novel builds between him and Jessica is the reason the rest carries any weight. Theirs had grown past its political origin into something steady and real. Two people who trusted each other completely in a world where trust was a luxury few could afford. When Leto dies in his failed strike at the Baron, Jessica does not get to grieve as a widow. She has to keep moving, keep her son alive, hold her composure in front of strangers, carry her grief folded down small beneath the discipline of her training while she works simply to survive the night. Whew. The Order taught her to put a gap between feeling and action. And now that training becomes the thing that lets her function while her heart is in pieces. She loved Leto enough to break the most important rule of her life for him, and she has to bury him in silence and walk on into the desert the same hour. The cost of her one act of love begins being paid that night, and it keeps being paid for the rest of her life. She survives because the Bene Gesserit had prepared the ground on Arrakis centuries before she was born, never imagining they were preparing it for her. The Order runs a long program called the Missionaria Protectiva, which seeds isolated and vulnerable populations across the galaxy with manufactured myths and protective prophecies. The purpose is the exact situation Jessica's now in. Any sister stranded among a seeded people can reach for the implanted legend and be received as a holy figure rather than killed as a stranger. Arrakis had been seeded long ago. The Fremen, the desert people the Atreides barely understood, carried planted stories about a Reverend Mother who would come to them from the outer worlds and about a male leader who would arise to change their world and lead them to paradise. Jessica recognized the legends the moment she heard their shape, because she had been trained in the toolkit that made them. So she pulled the levers. She let the Fremen read herself and Paul into the prophecy they were already carrying. Herbert does not let you enjoy this cleanly, and that is deliberate. He wants you to feel the cynicism in it. Jessica is taking the genuine faith of a desperate, oppressed people and steering it, using a religion her own order manufactured generations earlier, specifically so it could be exploited in moments like this one. It is manipulation, and the novel knows it is manipulation, and it shows you the long damage that follows when a fabricated prophecy meets a real and powerful person. But from inside her situation, it is also the only thing keeping her son alive. And by this point in her life, keeping her son alive has quietly become the only law she still answers to. The Order's law, the law she was raised to obey, has been replaced by the law of a mother in a desert with a hunted child. Among the Fremen, Jessica and Paul are taken into a sietch, a hidden cave community, under the protection of a Fremen leader named Stilgar. The Fremen live by a fierce economy of water, on a world with almost none, to the point that the water in a dead person's body is reclaimed for the tribe, and a person's worth is counted partly in the water they represent. Jessica is offered the role of the Sietch's Reverend Mother, their Sayadina, or priestess, because the old one is dying, and the prophecy promises a replacement from off-world. Paul is given the private Fremen name Usul among his companions, and the public name Muad'Dib, after the desert mouse, a name that will become the banner of a holy war. Jessica is no longer hiding among the Fremen. She is being woven into the center of their religious life, and the legends the Order planted are closing around her family like a hand. To truly become a Reverend Mother, though, Jessica has to do the most dangerous thing she ever does to her own body. The Fremen ritual demands the spice agony. She must take in the water of life, a concentrated poison drawn from a drowned, immature sandworm, and use her trained control to transmute it inside her, converting a substance that would kill an ordinary person into one that unlocks other memory and pours the full inheritance of every Reverend Mother before her into her mind at once. Trained sisters survive this. It is the central rite of their order, terrible and survivable. But Jessica undergoes it while she is pregnant. And the child in her womb, her unborn daughter Alia, is caught in the same chemical storm, awakened far too early, handed the full ancestral memory of thousands of dead lives before she has been born or formed a self of her own. There is no precedent for it. The Order has a single word for what this produces: abomination. A preborn, a child arriving already crowded with the consciousnesses of the dead, with no finished personality strong enough to hold them all down. The eeriest proof of what the Agony had done shows up before Alia is even born. Inside the womb, awakened and aware, the unborn daughter can communicate with her mother, a fully conscious mind, speaking from a body not yet finished. When Alia is finally born and grows into a small child, she is a child only in appearance. She speaks with a knowledge and the cold composure of the ancient women living inside her head. And the Fremen, who have a precise religious vocabulary for such things, recognize what she is and fear her for it. They call her the abomination to her face. A small child who carries the memories of millennia is not a daughter in any ordinary sense. And Jessica raised, or tried to raise, exactly that. The decision to undergo the agony while pregnant had been made in a single pressured moment for survival and for standing among the Fremen. And Alia is the lifelong consequence of that moment, a person who never had the chance to be only herself. And here's the pattern that, once you see it, defines the whole of Jessica's life. Every act of love she performs detonates into a catastrophe she never intended. She bore a son out of love for Leto, and that son becomes a messiah whose holy war burns across the galaxy and kills tens of billions in his name. She underwent the agony to claim her place and protect her unborn daughter, and that daughter becomes an abomination who will in time be possessed by the dead. Jessica is never reckless. She is one of the most disciplined and intelligent minds in the entire saga, and the disasters are not the fruit of weakness or stupidity. They grow out of love, operating inside a universe, arranged so that love in a person this capable and this placed becomes an explosive. That is a far harder and stranger idea than a tragic flaw. Her flaw, if it even deserves the word, is that she loved, and in her exact position, with her exact power, loving was the single most destabilizing thing a human being could do. After Paul masters the desert, defeats the Emperor's elite Sardaukar troops with a Fremen army, breaks the Harkonnens, and seizes the Imperial throne by threatening to destroy the spice the whole civilization depends on, a distance opens between mother and son. Jessica had raised Paul. She had taught him the disciplines, the control, the voice, the reading of people, the things that let him survive long enough to become what he became. But the thing he turns into reaches past her. He sees across time now the way the Kwisatz Haderach was designed to, and he sees the holy war coming, the billions who will die carrying his name across the stars, and he cannot find a path that avoids it, and neither can she. The mother who made the god can only stand and watch the god she made, so she leaves. She goes back to Caladan, the green ocean world where she had been happy with Leto, and she hands the desert and the throne and the terrible future to her son. It is the decision of a woman who has finally understood that she set something in motion that long ago outran her. In the years that follow, across the events of the novel Dune Messiah, Jessica stays mostly offstage, back on Caladan. By some accounts, she has made a quiet peace with the order she once defied and serves as a distant counselor to it, no longer a player on the board, but a voice consulted from far away. There is a strange arc in that. She spent her youth as the Order's instrument, her middle years as its great rebel, and her later years as something harder to name, a woman who belongs fully neither to the empire her son built, nor to the sisterhood that built her, watching both from the quiet distance of the world where her life began. Then she returns one last time, and it is the hardest homecoming of her life. The novel is Children of Dune, set years after Paul, blinded and grief-stricken, has walked into the desert to die in the Fremen way and vanished. Jessica comes back to Arrakis to examine her grandchildren, Paul's twin son and daughter, Leto II and Ganima, on behalf of the sisterhood, to judge whether these dangerous preborn children can be brought back under the Order's control. And she walks straight into a horror inside her own family. Her daughter Alia, the abomination created in the spice agony all those years before, has lost the long internal war that every preborn must fight against the dead voices inside them. One of those ancestral voices has seized control of her, and the voice that won, that now looks out through Alia's eyes and rules the empire through her body, is the Baron Vladimir Harkonnen, Jessica's own father. The grandmother comes home to find that her dead father is wearing her living daughter like a costume, governing through the granddaughter she doomed in the womb. The Harkonnen blood Jessica never knew she carried has surfaced all the way, and it is staring back at her out of her own child's face. The deepest irony of that final return is that Jessica comes back wearing the Order's colors again. After everything, after a lifetime of defying the sisterhood for the sake of her family, she arrives on Arrakis as their agent, sent to assess whether her own grandchildren can be reclaimed by the Order or must be treated as threats. The lifelong tension of her life snaps back into place one more time. Loyalty to the sisterhood that made her against love for the family she chose. And her grandson Leto II is moving toward a choice even larger than the one she once made. He sees, in his own prescience, a path that can save humanity from extinction far in the future, a brutal road he calls the Golden Path. And to walk it, he will have to merge his body with sand trout and become something no longer fully human, a tyrant who will live for thousands of years. Jessica is caught again between the Order that wants her grandchildren controlled and the children reaching for a destiny beyond anything the Order imagined. She does not fully understand what Leto II is becoming. Almost no one can. But she has spent her whole life as the case study in what happens when the Order's plans meet a will it cannot break, and now she watches the next generation do it on a scale that dwarfs her own. What comes next is the part of her story where Jessica finally acts entirely on her own terms. Alia, threatened by her mother's clear sight, gives the order to have Jessica killed. The swordmaster Duncan Idaho, restored to life by the Order's enemies but loyal in his bones, instead carries Jessica safely off-world, following the instruction of a blind desert preacher who may be Paul himself, returned in disguise and hidden among his own people. Jessica is brought to Salusa Secundus, the harsh prison world of the exiled imperial family, House Carino. And there she is, handed a pupil on the preacher's instruction, Prince Faradin Carino, grandson of the very emperor her son overthrew. The task carried to her is to train the heir of the defeated enemy in the Bene Gesserit way, and she does it. She takes the grandson of the dynasty her son destroyed and teaches him with full attention. And by the end of the book, Faradin has become bound to Paul's daughter Ghanima and the royal scribe of the New Order. The woman who began life as a tool of the breeding program ends her active story by freely choosing, on her own judgment, whom to teach and to what end. It is the closing of a long circle. She began as something used. She ends as someone who chooses. The sisterhood's view of her afterward is worth naming because it shows how completely she broke with them. To the Order, she was a failure of the worst kind. Not a weak agent, but a strong one who chose wrong. The proof that even their finest training could be undone by a single, unmanaged feeling. They had trusted her with one of the most important assignments in the entire breeding program, and she had spent that trust on love. For the rest of her life, she carries the knowledge that the Order she came from sees her as a cautionary tale. And yet, she's never quite cast out. Because the Order is too pragmatic to discard a Reverend Mother of her ability. And because the bloodline she carries is still the thing they want most. So she lives in a strange in-between, valued for her blood and her skill, distrusted for her choice, never fully inside the sisterhood again, and never fully free of it. Her choice did not stop echoing when she died, either. The bloodline she altered runs through the rest of the saga. Her grandson Leto II rules as the God Emperor for 3,500 years, holding humanity to his golden path through sheer tyranny, all of it descending from the son she chose to bear. And the sisterhood, for all that Jessica embarrassed and endangered them, never stops chasing the Atreides line. Thousands of years later, in the final novels Frank Herbert lived to write, the Order is still trying to capture and breed that same blood, still reacting to the genetics that one concubine scrambled on Caladan. Jessica reached forward across millennia without meaning to. The Order had wanted a human being who could bend the long future to a plan. What they got was a woman who bent it away from every plan, and whose single private decision was still shaping the species thousands of years after the last breath left her body. Step back from the events, and her life poses the question the whole saga keeps circling. The Bene Gesserit believed they could engineer the future, that with enough generations and enough control, they could breed and train their way to a being who would steer history where they wanted it to go. Jessica is the proof that they were both right and catastrophically wrong. They did produce a human who reshaped the future. They simply could not control the one variable that decided how. A single woman's love, an unscheduled choice in a private moment, redirected the entire 90-generation project and sent it crashing toward an outcome none of them had modeled. Herbert's point lands hard here. Prescience, breeding, planning, the long machinery of control, all of it runs aground on the fact that a person is not a component. Jessica was the most carefully designed instrument the Order had placed in a generation, and she still turned in their hand the instant her own heart pulled against their plan. If the most engineered woman alive could not be made to obey, the dream of a fully managed human future was always going to fail. It just took Jessica to prove it, and then she goes home for the last time. The later books mention, almost in passing, that Jessica lived out the remainder of her years on Caladan, the ocean world of her happiest life, and died there. She lived 102 years. She outlived her duke by decades, outlived the empire she helped raise in anything like its first shape, and outlived nearly every prediction her order ever made about her. Consider the shape of that life. She was built by the Bene Gesserit to be obedient above all, and her one decisive act was disobedience. She was bred from the cruelest house in the galaxy and gave her loyalty to the noblest one. She was trained to feel nothing that could threaten the plan, and she shattered the plan with the single feeling she could never train out of herself. The Sisterhood spent 90 generations trying to engineer a human being who could reach in and change the shape of the future. They got exactly that. It simply was not the Messiah they had designed. The person who changed everything was his mother, an instrument that turned in the hand, a woman who looked at 90 generations of meticulous planning and at the man she loved, and chose the man. Everything else in Dune, the prophet and the war and the worm that ruled for 3,500 years, is the long echo of that one quiet choice.